Hey everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Jill, otherwise known as the Enlightened Target, and this channel is devoted to narcissistic abuse, awareness and recovery, parental alienation, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and anything and everything associated with those three main topics. Today I'm doing a video on the tragic death of Gabby Petito, who was with all likelihood killed by her narcissistically abusive fiance. And I'm going to try and go over the body camera police video footage to try and help explain what we can learn or take away from this tragic homicide. This is a case of narcissistic abuse, in my opinion, and there are lessons that can be learned, I believe, from the video footage and the things that we know about the lives of Gabby and her partner, Brian Laundrie. I wish I was knowledgeable on how to upload the video footage to help elaborate on the points that I'm going to be making, but unfortunately I do not, and I don't have anyone who helps me with my videos, so this will just be me talking throughout the video. However, I encourage everyone to watch the full police body camera video if you have not done so already, and I will link that in the description below. So here we go. Gabby and her fiance were pulled over for reckless or careless driving, I believe in Utah, on August 12th, after someone called 911 reporting that they saw the man slapping the woman. When the police got up to their van, it shows Gabby crying and pretty distraught and looking a little traumatized. So the police separated the two to try and figure out what was going on. Most people who are not educated in identifying narcissistic abuse suggested that based on the video footage they saw, it seemed as if Gabby was suffering from a mental illness and that Brian had actually been the victim of a domestic assault because he had some scratch marks on his face. And indeed, that is the conclusion that the police came to. They reported that this was a mental health crisis and not a domestic violence incident or assault. The police decided to separate the two for the next 24 hours so things could calm down, and the police went on their way. So lesson number one is things do not always look the way they seem. Next, many people assume in these situations that both partners are equally abusive and equally at fault. That is simply a myth and does not apply to nearly all abusive relationships. So this is a mistake to assume that the old saying, it takes two to tango, is true when it's an abusive relationship and one of the people is a malignant narcissist. It's unfortunate that more people, including the police officers who pulled them over, weren't aware that in narcissistically abusive situations, it is the narcissist putting the complete blame on the victim, and usually the victim taking complete responsibility for what happened as well, because the victim has been severely gaslighted and has been psychologically abused and conditioned to believe that their abuser's attacks are actually their fault. In narcissistically abusive relationships, most people get this situation exactly backwards. That's an important fact and statistic to understand first and foremost. So lesson number two, it does not take two to tango. Next, a lot of people assumed that Gabby was the abuser and that Brian had been attacked by a mentally unstable female because Brian had scratch marks on his face. Those are defense wounds. The reality is that Brian had been attacking and slapping her, who was stuck in the car with nowhere to go. Narcissists love to attack their victims in the car for exactly that reason. The victim is stuck. No one else is in a direct witness, and the narcissist can abuse and terrorize the victim as long as they like. I cannot tell you how many times the narcissists in my life choose to abuse and attack me when I was stuck in the car with them. So lesson number three, just because a traumatized person is crying or distraught does not under any circumstances mean the person has a mental illness. Trauma and traumatization is not a mental illness. Next, there is something called reactive abuse, which all narcissists do and provoke in their victims. One of the main reasons that people believe that a victim has a mental illness from the trauma is that victims of relational narcissistic abuse tolerate the abuse really well until they cannot take it anymore, and they finally react. Then the narcissist, who is usually calm, cool, and collected, switches the script and tells everyone that the victim is crazy or mentally ill or unstable because they had a reaction to the abuse that they were being subjected to. So lesson number 4, just because someone calm tells you someone upset or traumatized is crazy or mentally unstable or is the problem does not make it fact. Next, abusers act very differently behind closed doors with an intimate partner than they do out in public. And one of the specialties of narcissistic abusers is they can be in a violent, abusive rage against the victim 1 minute and turn that off and turn on the charm and the bogus act of being the victim instead of the perpetrating abuser in the next minute. Non-abusive and traumatized people are not able to do that because we experience all human emotions, and we are not able to be abusive 1 minute and calm and cool victim the next minute. Only people without a conscience are able to do that. So lesson number 5, do not assume that the calm one is the victim and the angry, upset, hurt, or even hysterical person is the aggressor. Usually the exact opposite is true, and I'm sorry, but all police officers should know this information by now. The police in this case should have known what they were looking at. This is yet another reason public narcissistic abuse pathology education needs to be mandated for all people, especially the police and family court professionals. Okay, moving right along. An incredibly important fact for everyone to understand is that narcissists target very specific people for a romantic relationship. They are looking for a future partner that has high levels of empathy, high levels of responsibility, high levels of conscientiousness, and who are incredibly loyal. These are all very important character and personality traits that a narcissist looks for in a target. However, once they secure the relationship, the narcissist becomes pathologically envious of the victim and incredibly jealous. Therefore, narcissists are going to try and break the victim down. They are going to try and destroy the victim's self-esteem, sense of self-worth, and confuse the victim by subjecting them to very high levels of gaslighting. This relationship is a psychological game to the narcissist, and tearing the victim down without the victim understanding what is happening is the narcissist's highest priority, and they will do anything to provoke a negative reaction in the victim as they get super high levels of narcissistic supply from their ability to do this. Also, this is very important to the narcissist because they know they are going to twist and manipulate the victim's reaction to them becoming the victim and accusing the victim of being abusive and mentally unstable or crazy. This is exactly what had been happening on this day that they got pulled over, that Gabby and Brian got pulled over. He started a fight with her, then he took her phone away from her to prevent her from working or calling anyone. Then he refused to let her into her own van. Once she was in the van, he began slapping her and grabbing her face, no doubt sprinkling it with tons of emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse. So lesson number 6, understand that the true abuser is a master manipulator and a very skilled psychological abuser. Unfortunately, many people will buy into the phony narrative that the abuser is the victim and the victim is the aggressor or the abuser or the unstable one, even the victim. Please hear me when I say this. The victim most times will believe the phony narrative that they are the problem and the responsible party for the narcissist's abuse. At the core of narcissistic abuse is psychological abuse, and victims are incredibly vulnerable to the gaslighting. The reason the victim believes the narrative the narcissist is telling them is because the victim has a conscience, And the victim would never lie to someone and gaslight someone they love in this manner. So they tend to believe the narcissist. What they don't understand is that their partner does not have a conscience. What they don't know is that they are involved with a very dangerous, Machiavellian, psychopathic abuser. And unfortunately, Gabby bought into the narrative Brian had forced onto her because she believed that Brian was the same kind of person that she was. So lesson number 7, a victim's understanding or interpretation is many times drastically affected, and many times the victim will not truly understand what they are being subjected to or understand that they have been severely psychologically abused. Next point. In the police video, Gabby makes a million excuses for Brian's behavior, and she takes full accountability for the entire situation. At the same time, Brian takes no accountability and blames Gabby for the entire situation. He claims he was just trying to keep her calm. Here again, this is incredibly common in narcissistically abusive relationships. Educated police officers would have seen through this. So lesson number 8, when a person takes no personal accountability for a situation like this, you are more than likely looking right at the guilty party. Narcissists don't take accountability for anything negative. Remember, narcissists always change the narrative to one that makes them into the hero, the victim, or the martyr, or some combination of all three. But never do they take accountability for being the villain or the responsible party, when in reality, that is exactly what they are. Next, many people were horrified that Brian's parents refused to cooperate with the police. I was horrified as well, but not surprised. Clearly, this family would do anything to protect their son, including refusing to help find their missing future daughter-in-law, regardless of the desperate pleas from her family, begging them to tell them something. I also wasn't surprised to hear that Gabby had been living at the Laundrie's family home for the last year. Narcissists cannot get away with the things they do without enablers. I have no doubt these parents have been participating, excusing, or at the very least ignoring their son's entitled abusive behavior against Gabby for quite some time. This family likely works together as a unit, them against everyone else. If a malignant narcissist has a close relationship with their family after the narcissist is an adult, guaranteed they're part of the problem. Guaranteed. So lesson number 9, don't ever expect the family members of a malignant narcissist to do the right thing. They will lie and cover up for the narcissist indefinitely. And in my opinion, they are every bit as guilty as the narcissist. Enablers need to start being held criminally accountable, in my opinion. Moving on. In the police body cam video, we hear Gabby telling the police officer that Brian didn't think she could do her travel blog, which indicates to me that he doesn't believe in her, so he's trying to make her not believe or have confidence in herself. She also stated that he didn't like her working, which she had been doing that day before this altercation and fight. They were in a coffee shop, and she was working on her travel blog. Brian, however, wanted to go hiking and was tired of her working on her blog. Sounds to me like Brian took off out of the restaurant to leave without Gabby, trying to show her who wears the pants and to provoke her. And when Gabby came out to the van, he wouldn't let her in. Of course this upsets Gabby. No doubt this episode was full of emotional and verbal abuse against Gabby, and she became upset. He intentionally caused this. Then he presents it to the police officers as he was just trying to calm her down. So lesson number 10, narcissistically abusive people are pathological liars and manipulators. You can take nothing that they say at face value. Nothing. Next, while Gabby and Brian were in the van after the episode in the parking lot at the coffee shop, Brian was slapping her and grabbing her face. Again, after he had intentionally provoked this entire episode and gets her incredibly upset, Once she gets in the car, witnesses say they saw him slapping her in the face. I'm going to say it again. Narcissists love to abuse victims when they are in the car because the victim has no way out. This is very common in narcissistic abusive relationships. Brian got a narcissistic injury from Gabby working too long on her blog in the coffee shop. Her attention was not solely focused on him, and that caused a narcissistic injury. When a narcissist gets a narcissistic injury, that injury must be accounted for, paid for, alleviated, neutralized, whatever you want to call it. And the way narcissists feel relief from a narcissistic injury is by abusing someone else. In this case, Gabby Petito. Narcissistic injuries produce narcissistic rage, and in my opinion, that's exactly what happened here. And Gabby was at the receiving end of this narcissistic rage, stuck in a van with no way out. And the abuse, no doubt, escalated once Brian felt they were alone without any onlookers. So, lesson number 11, narcissists abuse their victims in places hidden from everyone else. Their public and private personas could not be any more different. Next, they eventually got pulled over, and Gabby was traumatized and crying very hard. And as I have mentioned before, the police officers separate the two, and because Brian was calm, cool, and collected, and Gabby was traumatized and crying, the assumption is that Gabby was the unstable one and that Brian was the calm one who was only trying to calm Gabby down. And this is the assumption that so many people make when they see abusive relationships like this. And it is the wrong assumption, dead wrong. In this case, it cost this poor girl her life. In closing, I would like to make a couple of remarks. Narcissistic abuse can be perpetrated by a man or a woman. NPD does not discriminate between males or females. There are many cases that could be analyzed to show that females have done this to males. The Jodi Arias case being one of them. Also, if you are struggling with issues associated with narcissistic abuse, please contact a professional for support. If you are in immediate danger, please contact the police or the domestic abuse hotline, which I linked in the description below.